Jamie Schickler is a managing attorney of the Behavioral Health Division and co-director of the Intern Extern Program at the Law Office of the Public Defender in DeKalb County, Georgia. Originally from the Northeast, Jamie left the region to attend Northwestern University and obtained her undergraduate degree in 2009. After a gap year spent backpacking around the world, she vowed to never return to the Chicago winters and ventured to the South, where she graduated from Emory University School of Law in 2013 with honors. Upon graduation, Jamie became a public defender and has never looked back. She recognizes how her own life has been impacted by privilege and strives to use her time, energy, and talent to confront the systems of oppression she sees every day in the world of public defense and beyond. She believes in the inherent dignity and worth of every human being, regardless of what he or she might have done. Jamie also teaches at Emory Law's annual Trial Techniques program and has also given guest lectures to law students on the intersection of criminal and immigration law. As a wife and mom to both biological and foster children, Jamie spends most of her free time chasing people, and the dog, around the house. Had a great time of education from Jamie. This is a world I know nothing about, a lot of us know nothing about, and I really challenge you to just listen because, again, there's so much going on in this world, and I think there's a lot to learn. Get mad. Stay blessed.
All right. Welcome again, curious brothers and sisters. As you have been following along, we are in the month discussing incarceration and the complexities of, well, gosh, that could go so many directions. All the things related to inequity and why, arguably, as it's been called, the new Jim Crow. And today, as you just heard from the bio reading, we have Jamie. And I'm super pumped because seeing through this lens from that side of being a public defender, I think is such a unique, it's such a unique opportunity for us to hear things that we don't, as average citizens, probably don't understand or hear, let alone if we're even engaged with communities that maybe are struggling with policing issues or incarceration, but also just really understanding the lawful side of things. So, Jamie, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm very appreciative that you're bringing light to some of these issues. And I do want to just say to start off that, for the record, these are my opinions and thoughts and don't reflect the sort of position of my employer. But yeah, I'd love to talk about these issues. Like you said, there's so many ways we can go. And just so much we can learn about.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the first thing that comes to my head, honestly, is, well, quick backdrop is the way I got into this, most of the issues I become passionate about are because some sort of experience pops up, right? And I had a good friend that came into my life and, knowing nothing about them, just meeting them on the street, but then learning about their experience in prison, getting out, and then I think the biggest issue that we dealt with at the time was the compounding child support he had accrued during that time. And that just led into a whole slew of things for me that I was like, I didn't even know about this or this side of things. But then you just keep going deeper and you start digging holes about the drug war and the connections with that, which we just did last month. Talking about that side of things. So, but as a public defender, I would love for you to just kind of share a little bit about, maybe even how you got into that, but what is a public defender even, what is the role of that in as a service to the community and for those who are in prison and struggling to have anyone represent them?
Sure. So, on a sort of basic level, a public defender, we represent anyone charged with a criminal offense, which in Georgia, where I practice, technically traffic offenses are criminal. So anything from traffic offenses all the way to, murders, sexual assault cases, armed robberies, things like that. We represent people charged who are unable to hire private counsel. And I don't know if the statistic is still, accurate, but I think, what I've read before is about 85% of people charged with crime in the United States are legally indigent. And what that means is they fall below the federal poverty guidelines. So when we when someone applies to have a public defender represent them, we have to consider, their financial resources, their family size, et cetera, and determine whether they qualify as legally indigent. Again, occasionally we get someone apply for us who makes more money and does not qualify, but almost everybody who applies for our services does qualify, which obviously, speaks to the whole issue of criminalization of poverty and things like that. So, when I grew up in a very privileged environment. I grew up in a wealthy area, stable family, healthy, a predominantly white environment, and was very sort of unaware of how the criminal system, and I don't even like to call it the criminal justice system because there is so much injustice in it, but how the criminal system really does oppress so many segments of our population. And so when I went to law school, I kind of stumbled into this work. I started interning with the Georgia Innocence Project, and started working with clients who were, making claims of innocence. They were imprisoned for pretty serious offenses. And I started to kind of fall in love with the work. It's just, not only are the cases interesting and the issues are interesting, but, it really is a privilege to sit down with somebody in sort of the lowest point of their lives and just have a conversation that's filled with dignity, respect, listening, understanding, because so many people who are caught up in our criminal system are, essentially forgotten and sort of discarded by society. And I think a lot of the reason is because they're, low income and have no real power in the system where money is so important. So we represent most people charged with crimes in DeKalb County, Georgia. And, I've been doing this for about 10 years now and kind of seen a little bit of everything. But it's definitely, there are still like shocking moments where I'm like, I can't believe somebody's in this situation. I can't believe this is what we are doing as a society to people with mental health issues, drug issues, people who just, like you said, with the child support, like people who are behind in their child support payments or, have a ticket for driving with a suspended license because they couldn't, pay their insurance or whatever. And then it compounds because the more tickets they get, the more money they owe. And eventually sometimes they end up in jail simply because they can't pay. Now, technically under the law, you can't incarcerate someone just for being low income, but in a practical matter, practically speaking, it happens all the time. If there's any other, non-income related basis for incarcerating someone, it happens all the time. So I guess,
my mind kind of goes two places. One place I want to go is poverty. I want to talk a little bit about that. But before, I'm interested to kind of hear, if you have specific statistics, those work, but even just experientially, do you see oftentimes that it often is impacting like the Black and African American community more? But here's where I want to go with that: is there's poor people on both sides, right? And so, why, if there is an imbalance, why is that in terms of, well, there's obviously poverty on this other side. There's rural white folk and whatever, other brown communities that are poor as well. Why, and is there, I guess, an imbalance that in the 10 years you've practiced? And if so, why do you think that is?
Sure. Well, the short answer is yes, there's definitely an imbalance. I think, and again, I'm not sure exactly if these numbers are correct, but in DeKalb County, where I live and work, think it's about 2/3 Black, 1/3 mostly white, and then a few kind of other populations in there. But I would say probably, I don't know, 95% of my clients are Black, maybe more. So
You're
there's
saying the 2/3 Black, 1/3 white is the general population
of the county, correct? Yes.
95% of your clients are Black African American.
Yes, and those are kind of estimates, but it's definitely not. There's definitely an imbalance with who is arrested, who is prosecuted, with the sentences they receive, and of course there are white people who live in poverty. Not as much where I work.
Sure.
But it's a combination. It's income and it's race. And obviously we have a long history of systemic racism in this country. We have a long history of low income Black communities being over policed when low income white communities may not be experiencing that the same way. You think about like issues with drugs, right? Like we had the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s, and that was heavily, and still is heavily, prosecuted as crime. And then when you see the opioid epidemic, happen, it's often white people who are victims of that epidemic. And it's fantastic that that's being treated now more as a public health crisis as opposed to, a crime issue, but you can see kind of how it's dealt with differently. And I think a lot of that is, some of it's explicit bias, some of it's explicit racism, but a lot of it is we just don't, it's implicit bias. We don't realize how we are viewing people of a certain color or background differently in the same sort of context, whether it's drug use, mental health issues, family instability, poverty. So we look at it through a lens of who is that person? What do they look like? What is their history? What is their, culture? And we make judgments based on that. So, I see that all the time. I actually live in a neighborhood in my county that is majority minority. And there's a lot of police around. And people have different opinions about whether the police should be present or not. But, you have sometimes really minor issues where, people in my neighborhood are getting arrested, where that would just never happen in another neighborhood, either because the police aren't present in the first place, or because, if a police officer sees like a white 20-year-old smoking weed, they're not gonna bother arresting that person. Whereas they may bother arresting someone in a low income, especially Black or brown community.
So maybe I'm just getting too heady and like philosophical with it, but like, is that like changeable? Like, you can't, like, you can only try to like convince other people like how they should view the world or whatever, but like, I don't know. I just get so caught up in my head about like, okay, well, like, it seems like some things have gotten better, right? Like since say, the 60s. But then over policing or inequity in who gets charged with things and incarceration like still seems very imbalanced. But then you also have people that are like, but I'm not a racist. And obviously that's like way too surface level of a conversation. But like, I don't know, like, have you experienced being able to engage with other people about these kind of like bigger topics of inequity and felt like, I don't know, like maybe like with judges and stuff, for example, like do judges feel like there's inequity, or do judges feel, and this is maybe way too broad of a question, but like, do they see it too, or do they think, nope, we're being judges, like we're looking at the sentence, we're not looking at the person, we're just giving them based off what they were charged with or whatever and making a call, or is that just too simplistic? Because
no, it's a good question, and I think one of the issues is, there's many issues, but I think one of the issues is that sometimes when we are looking at it from, the 10,000 foot level, we're like, oh, this is not just, there is inequity here. We need to change things. And then when we look at a specific case and, for me, client, the system may still view that person as almost exempt from it because of their, personal responsibility, what they have chosen to do. This person did this, so they are being punished accordingly without maybe thinking about the larger context. Why is this person where they are? Why has this person had untreated mental health issues for, 20 years? How did they get to be in this position? And even some of my clients have done some really, objectively really bad things. But it's so important to go sort of back, not only in the history of that one person, but like intergenerational trauma, right? Stemming from slavery. We've had intergenerational trauma that cycles through and creates a lot of instability for a lot of folks who live in our communities. And so I think it's easy to sort of say what needs to be said on that like bird's eye view level, and to acknowledge that the system is racist, that the system is classist. But then where I feel like there's a disconnect is like, okay, we're dealing with this person, this case, and they did X, Y, and Z wrong. And so this is the punishment, without really, not that nobody considers mitigating factors or a client's background, but at the end of the day, they're still going to get, oftentimes incarcerated or put under probation. And Georgia has, I believe it's the highest number of individuals on probation or parole in the country, I believe. And obviously we're not the most populous state. So probation and parole is a huge issue too, because it's very, very easy to violate probation or parole, especially if you're someone without a lot of resources. And so then they end up back in that cycle of being incarcerated, and then maybe you get arrested and then you lose your job. And then maybe you can't pay for the apartment anymore. And so sometimes these like little issues, like probation violations for say not reporting to probation or not completing your community service or whatever it might be, end up being like truly devastating to someone who doesn't have that, that safety net, that security net that so many, well, not so many, but many people, at least in our world, like have, right? Like if I got arrested, like I have a security sort of network, financial resources, like family resources, where it may not like devastate my entire life. But for a lot of my clients, like they're always kind of like on the edge of losing everything.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's how my friend was for sure. And I even remember there were times where they would come to me and they'd be like, I don't want to go deal, but I don't know whatever choice I have. And I think, it's definitely these stories that I think not just telling them, but people, unfortunately, they don't get a chance to experience it because I guess fear or whatever it might be, and engaging in those different kind of communities. I'm kind of curious, from the poverty side, that's a perpetual cycle that definitely enhances all of these things, but it kind of, obviously I understand you can't probably go too deep, for attorney-client privilege type stuff, but like, I'm curious what you hear from them. Like, what do you hear? Like, what are the solutions? Not just practically like, well, people need to be out of poverty, but like, what are they saying? Like what do your clients, because I would imagine you're the person that they feel comfortable at least maybe opening up a little bit to, and going, shit, I don't want to do this, but like, what are they saying? Like if they had X or if they could do Y, like what are some of those things that you've heard that maybe are practical or maybe we don't know how to do, but clearly they're the ones saying what they need. So what are those things?
Yeah. And I have clients with, great family networks, but I have a lot of clients with with no family network, no community network. And sometimes, I'm the only person who's sort of in the corner with my client, which again is like a huge privilege for me, that I can be in that space with that person. A lot of my clients, especially as they get older, they're like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of being in this cycle. I don't feel like I'm a bad person. I'm not trying to, break the law and go to jail. For some clients, it's housing instability. For some clients, it's trauma. And this is kind of a different topic, but I am also a foster parent. And so I've done a lot of sort of training on trauma. I've seen children with trauma like in my home, and there's a lot of parallels between kids in my home and, my clients and their backgrounds where, if you experience, lack of nutrition, you see violence as a young child, you maybe are not spoken to or with as much in terms of like vocabulary and brain development. So many of my clients, like from the moment, even in the womb, but from the moment they're born, there is trauma that they've experienced that actually impacts the way their brains develop, may lower their IQ, may cause them to have certain like fight or flight responses. And so it's a hard question to answer because there's so many things that could be done better.
Right.
But like, I've kind of come to the point where like there can be good temporary solutions, like setting up housing, setting up treatment, setting up, whatever it is that can make a situation more stable in the present time. But if we're ever going to make sort of systemic change, I've really come to believe that we need to focus on early intervention programs. Because if children aren't developing in a healthy, appropriate way, like how can we expect them to be sort of fully, and I don't say this because there's a lot of my clients who are perfectly, fully functioning adults. I'm not meaning to like make it sound like my clients are children, or that's not at all what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like it's hard to expect some of my clients to be sort of fully functioning, rule-abiding citizens when they've never really had that chance. I think a lot of clients just wish that there would be, honestly, like there might be concrete stuff that they need, but sometimes it's just empathy and understanding, like like in our county, felony probation moved. It used to be like right near the courthouse. And now it's actually in another county. It's not on a bus line. It's not on a train line. It is so, so hard for my clients to get to probation when it's not even in this county. And so sometimes it's just a little empathy and understanding of just how hard this is.
The county's probation office isn't in the county?
Correct. I know.
Like, that's the kind of thing that makes like such negative sense.
Yeah.
I can't even fathom why that would be. Like, I don't like being a conspiracy theorist, but I'm sitting there going like, why would you do that? Like, there has to be logic in the heads of the people that did that on why they did that.
Right.
That's mind blowing.
And I wasn't, at the table when that decision was made, obviously, but I mean, I would imagine, the powers that be may have just said there's more space and it's more affordable and the county can, I don't know.
Of course.
It's just, it's outrageous. Like I'll have clients being like, I can't go all the way out there. And I'm like, I know, but you're going to have to find a way or you're going to get arrested again. And there's no like good answer to give clients in those situations. So yeah, it's outrageous. It's just one of those things that you never would expect to hear. And you're like, oh, this is actually like really hard for my clients to do.
Early childhood intervention. What does or can that look like? I mean, because now I feel like it's such a, I don't know. I almost feel like part of like the conversation at hand needs to even take a step back and be like, what the fuck is America?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do we want as a nation? Because I even feel like that can't be answered. And the reason I say that is like, in one sense, intervention implies we operate communally and collectively on decisions that involve other humans, even humans that could argue are children and therefore can't make their own decisions. But yet, classic age-old debate would be like, how you discipline your kids, right? Like, do you spank them or do you not spank them? How can that be a conversation from a collective perspective? Like, what does it look like to have, childhood intervention to hopefully help them develop more? I mean, I've just never even thought of it from that level.
Yeah. And, this is like not exactly my area of expertise, but I've thought a lot about it because of the interactions experiences I've had with clients and kids in the foster system. I think it's, you ask a good question, like, what do we want America to be? And I've never really bought the whole, where does the money come from argument? Because we're the richest country in the history of the world. Like, the money is there. It's just a matter of where we're putting it. And I think until you've sat down in a jail booth with somebody who's experiencing the worst day of their lives, whether it's they're losing their apartment or they're about to, go to trial in a murder case that they know they're going to lose, or, whatever it may be, until you've sat down and heard someone's story and see them as a person, it's so easy to, put those blinders up. And I think it's easy to say we all have the same opportunities in the United States without ever actually like entering into those spaces where there isn't that privilege, whether it's racial privilege, economic privilege, educational privilege. And I think it's about just like, do we not only care about other people, but do we care about people who have nothing in common with us? Do we care about people who don't come from the same background? Do we care about those communities that are, on the other side of town that we've never interacted with? And I think that was something for me, like, as I went into this career, like, again, I grew up in a very like white bread world where everybody's dads were doctors and lawyers and bankers. And, so it's like, there are a lot of people like in the community where I grew up who just have no clue. It's not that they're outwardly racist or they want to be racist or they don't care. It's that they haven't taken the step to expose themselves to these issues. And so like having these conversations is just bringing awareness to the issue is so important. But I feel you're back to your question about early interventions, I think, and I could go down a whole rabbit hole about like school and how schools are funded in this country. But, like some of my clients just need more services in place so that maybe they can take better care of their children, right? Provide better food for their children, better nutrition. Maternal care in this country is abysmal. Child care is a problem. Like I have clients miss court because they have no one to watch their child, or they have to bring their child into court and then they get in trouble because their child is screaming in court. If there were some more of those sort of safety nets, I feel like a lot of my clients wouldn't ever, have those initial interactions with the system. And then once you have the initial interaction with the system, it often becomes cyclical, right? Because once you have a felony conviction, you can't get certain benefits. You can't get housing. You often can't find a decent job. And so once you're in the system, or you're still on probation, or you're on parole, once you're in the system, it's so, so hard to sort of revert and get back out. There's so many things.
I mean, I know. I almost like, I started going down in my head about like, I just want to name all the things. What are all the things? Like, okay, education, childcare, like you start naming like the systems, or the services that should exist. And I guess again, my head goes back. I'm such a natural cynic. So I go, okay, well, like now you have this debate of like, what should be provided? What services should be provided versus, no government. I don't want the government. I don't want this stuff, And like, I almost feel like until even that basic conversation is had, which also doesn't really make sense to me, because like the little bit of history I started reading, I'm like, okay, well, all you gotta do is go back and look at FDR's plan and stuff and go like, oh, that was basically like services for everyone. Like, and so I don't know. Like I agree. It seems like whether race is a direct cause in someone's head of why they do something, whether it's a cop arresting someone or a judge making a decision, whatever it is, it's all this other stuff pre any of that existed. And like I said, their story. Why did this 19-year-old kid have a gun in his hand,
right,
with a group of kids? I mean, we just had 6 people killed downtown on Cherry Street 3 weeks ago. Gang related, so they say. And it's like, I understand there needs to be consequences to actions, but I kind of go back to the drug war conversation and the classic example of Rat Park. And it's like, the second the rat had stuff to do, whether it was like food and water freely available and housing and exercise equipment, they stopped taking the drugs. They didn't want the drugs.
Right.
Like, and the drug, that's just one component of it. But now we're talking about, well, maybe part of the beginning is what is human rights? Like, what rights do we deserve? That should be a place to start. But
well, and it's like, why are these kids in this situation? Like, of course there have to be consequences if someone, murders someone at the gas station. But why are we in this situation where there's a bunch of teenagers with guns? You think about how few opportunities there are for so many of these kids. And when you're in that world with so few opportunities, combined with sometimes, everybody's brain is not fully developed until they're about 25. But then if you're thinking about additional trauma and how that impacts brain development, you have we have kids who go to prison for the rest of their life because of something, that they never should have been able to do, I guess is sort of the point. Like what kind of society are we living in where like a group of kids can just like, now I'm getting on gun control, but can just like go by a bunch, so
let me ask you this. Okay.
Yeah.
From a legal perspective, how does the justice system work? So for example, is it state or is it federal? Like, so if they come in with a charge, how is it decided what that charge is worth? And I know there's the whole, like, you're pleading and it's, but is there like a baseline, and how's that baseline decided? Is it at state level, is it federal level, and who's deciding that?
Sure. So criminal law is very state by state jurisdictional. Okay. So criminal codes in Texas or Washington or Illinois, whatever, are going to be very different from criminal codes in Georgia. The evidence code in terms of like what is admissible or not admissible in a case has been a lot more standardized because many states have adopted the federal rules of evidence. But in terms of the codes, so what constitutes this crime, what the punishments are, things like that, that's very state by state. So, if someone is either arrested on scene during an incident, or say someone's not arrested on scene, but an officer or a private citizen can apply, it doesn't happen that often, a private citizen can apply for arrest warrant. Once you're booked in on that warrant, then a case is open. If it's a felony warrant, then it's going to be open. At least in DeKalb County, we have Superior Court, which is felonies, and State Court, which is misdemeanors. Some of the smaller circuits just have Superior Court handle everything. But in our county, because it's a pretty large, like metro area county, we have there's separate prosecuting offices for misdemeanors and felonies. So, some clients, so some people will get bonds and some people won't. There's a lot of different kind of factors that go into that. So some of our clients will be out on bond waiting for their case to be resolved. Some of our clients will never get a bond. And whether that's because the charges are so serious or their criminal history is really long, or maybe they get a bond, but they can't
afford it or couldn't.
And so some of our clients will sit, and especially during COVID, some of our clients are sitting for years while their cases are pending.
Oh, wow. So
now,
you're not talking weeks. We're talking like the court date can be a year or two out. So you can be in jail, and because you don't have the means to get a bond, even though you were given the opportunity with the bond at X amount of dollars, they could be essentially not fully charged, but be in prison for however long, or jail, I guess.
Yeah. It is typically like people who are going to be in that long, it's typically going to be like a murder, something more serious.
Case, yeah.
But, I've had clients in for, felony shoplifting for months and months and months, usually because they have a really long history of shoplifting or something like that. And then when it gets time to, once the case gets indicted, and we get discovery and a sentencing recommendation from the prosecutor, if it's sort of a time served offer, some clients who may not, a lot of my clients, have committed the shoplifting or whatever, but some clients who are adamant that they didn't commit this crime will still enter a guilty plea just to get out of jail, right? Because it's like, do you want to get out of jail tomorrow and plead guilty? Or do you want to wait a couple months for your case to be called for trial? And it's nice to think that we would all, stand on our principles and wait it out. First of all, no one wants to be in jail longer than they have to be. And again, when you stand to lose everything by maybe having 2 more months in jail, you're going to do what you need to do to get out. So some people are in custody, some people are out of custody. Ultimately, so the police take out the initial warrants, and then ultimately the district attorney's office decides what formal charges to file. And then that's when it goes in front of a superior court judge. And, most cases results in some type of guilty plea. I think it's again, the statistic may not be completely accurate, but I think it's 4% of cases go to have a jury trial. Just because the risks are so high and the wait is often so long.
Right.
And that's sort of another term that is thrown out a lot is the trial tax. So we have the right, under the United States Constitution to have a jury of our peers, decide whether we're guilty or not guilty. We have a right under the Sixth Amendment to have an attorney represent us. But there are situations where, your client might get an offer 2 years in prison and a couple years on probation to plead guilty. But if they go to trial, they're facing maybe 20. And they don't know for sure whether they're going to get 20, but it's this huge risk of facing an enormously larger amount of time if you are essentially asserting your constitutional rights. So that's just kind of another facet.
It's almost like it's more it's almost like it's more costly to stand on your constitutional rights.
That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. It's you're getting punished for asserting your rights.
I saw a video recently where it was how to how to respond to a cop if you're pulled over, right? It wasn't specific to anything other than here's your rights, right? They were lawyers. And in my head, I thought like, that's awesome knowledge. And I wish that was taught, say, in school. Like we are taught, all of us. But at the same time, I don't know if it like might help a little bit for some people, but like, I don't know if it's really gonna matter. Cause like, it's almost like by enforcing those rights, you actually are just causing this human, just because he has a badge, he's still human and his biases, and to just react and hope that like they are responsible or like understanding, which may or may not be the case. And maybe that's where it all starts. We're just dealing with a bunch of humans.
Well, right. I mean, we're all people with flaws and biases, and especially like, I mean, I feel like once you're sort of in a career environment for a while, you kind of, you know, you can adopt groupthink, right? And maybe start to have beliefs that you never thought you would have going into it. There are some programs, usually they're called Know Your Rights programs, where they go into schools, especially low-income schools, and talk about your rights, which is so important. But we also have to keep in mind how like stressful in the moment that situation would be, having a police officer interrogating you. And especially a lot of my clients are really young and, you know, think that they need to say something. So instead of asking for an attorney, they just talk. And, you know, it's intentional too, right? Like police interrogation is intentionally high pressure. You know, they have multiple, like, especially in a serious case, put you in an interview room, multiple experienced detectives. They often play like a good cop, bad cop thing. They intentionally lie about the evidence they have against you, and that's legal. You know, well, what about when Michael, what about when I find I found your DNA on it, or what, you know, whatever it is, like, oh, we have video of you doing this, so you better tell us what happened so we can help you. You know, there's those kinds of conversations that, and again, false and coerced confessions is a whole other topic. But we think about, especially like if you have a low-income Black kid, who has no reason to trust the cops, right? All of a sudden is being interrogated. This kid has no sort of power or agency in that situation, is scared, and, you know, is going to feel that pressure. And so that kind of goes back to the race and class thing, right? Mm-hmm. Probably a lot of kids of, you know, a kid of a big corporate lawyer might feel more confident saying, you know, I know my rights, blah, 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 because they're not fearing that they're going to get shot or beaten or wrongly arrested, because that's a generally like legitimate confidence that they can have, because they're going to be treated differently just by the nature of who they are.
So if a lot of the codes and stuff, a lot of this is state regulated, because I also think to like we are generationally only able to see so much based off how we were raised, not how we were raised, but like when we were raised. So for example, it's like, hey, it's 2022 and cops exist in the way that they exist now, but cops didn't always exist in that way. And so if we wanted to say, hey, one area that could change is how cops are trained and approach scenarios, right? And it seems like a lot of people operate under this idea that like things that exist now have existed that same way the whole time, forever in America. But I guess my question is, how much do you feel like politics can assist on these topics of specifically incarceration, and even maybe services that would, in theory, assist with lowering incarceration or even prison systems from a state level? Like how important is it to be involved in local politics, whether it's mayoral or state senate and things like that? Like, do you see that as a real viable, necessary engagement level for general citizens?
Yes. Well, I think specifically of like elections of judges or county commissioners, school superintendents. We often don't have a lot of information about those types of elections. Like everybody knows who's running for president or like maybe the US Senate, and those are really, really important, elections to pay attention to, of course. But there's so much, especially in the sort of criminal system, there's so much on the state level. The state legislature is the one who passes like the criminal code. The state legislature is the one who decides if certain offenses aren't eligible for bond or mandatory minimums. We have a lot of mandatory minimums in Georgia. That's all the state legislature. So that is definitely an important area to pay attention to. And then on even more local level, like with the county, and again, I don't know if other jurisdictions are structured the same way, but we have county commissioners, we have school board, we have this school superintendent, and there are decisions being made about how many police officers to put in schools and situations like that. And we could go down another rabbit hole of the school to prison pipeline of how Black and brown kids are, I don't know the statistics, but way more likely to be arrested at school for the same type of behavior as, may occur in a more affluent school. More likely to be suspended or expelled, more likely to have force used against them. So there are local sort of politicians who impact this larger system in very important ways, but on sort of more focused ways, I guess. And then there's like county judges, and some states, everybody's appointed, but in Georgia, for the most part, like superior court judges are elected. And, I have friends sometimes who text me like, hey, I'm about to go to the polls. Who should I vote for in these judge races? Which is great that they trust my opinion and took the time to ask. But I mean, so many people go in there and they don't know anything. And oftentimes that means voting for the incumbent, not always. And so these are just really important issues to think about if you care about inequities, mass incarceration, school to prison pipeline, all of those things.
I feel like that was super helpful. So 2 things I want to quickly say is one, I'm going to find those statistics and we'll put them in the show notes because I want to put as much data because again, people like to be trolls and like, see, there wasn't even a statistic. So I'll find some statistics on generality on like why certain minorities are more likely to be XYZ. On that note, it is fascinating because I feel like I was never political. I was never raised to be political, except for thanks to kind of like Reagan era and Jerry Falwell to then all of a sudden be political about the one issue of abortion. But even recently, as a family, but also like as a business and then as a community, like you see people more engaged in politics. I mean, I'm sure there are people that read about the judges, but like I have never thought or cared about that or thought to care about that. But I don't even know how a lot of friends, like the ones who are like, here's who to vote for mayor, or here's county mayor, like, some of the bigger positions, but like, I don't really see anyone talking about the judges. I'm sure there is again, but like, I think that's a really encouraging way to think about it because I guess maybe where it really starts is that local level, be engaged civically with your local community. But I now want to figure out, okay, what does it look like for Chattanooga and then for Tennessee as a state? Where are the resources that show us all these structures and what they mean? I don't know. I don't even know what half of these positions do really,
Right.
So like that's for me, what everything you just said is really sparking my desire to feel like maybe there's at least that solution, right? Like let's create a structure for people to learn about these positions. Let's create a way for them to know more about the person running and where they stand on certain issues so that we can change, at least on a local level, hopefully some of these systems. So yeah, that's good. That's really good. I definitely think politics are crucial. But people are like, I don't want to be in politics.
Yeah, people are just like, oh, Trump versus Biden, but it's like, that's one piece. And it's an important piece, obviously, but there are so many sort of elections and positions that actually impact your daily life much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, here's what I'd say. For the sake of time, Jamie, thank you so much. I would love to open it up real quick for anything. Here's what I like to end with these episodes. Like, what is maybe a couple or even just one piece of knowledge or education that is oftentimes misrepresented or misconstrued, or there is misinformation on when it comes to incarceration or people struggling in that world? What's something you'd like to share maybe to the general public?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would encourage people, especially people who are sort of skeptical a lot of the things I've said or talked about, to, I mean, engage in these communities that are, you know, victims of sort of this cycle of mass incarceration. I think it's just so easy to discount these issues until you sit down with somebody and see who that person is, what that person's story is, see how these different inequities have impacted them. You know, it's like John Lewis had that quote about, you know, come walk in my shoes. Like, walk until you walk in somebody's shoes, you're not really going to appreciate what that person's story and situation has been. And another thing is, you know, talking about the mass incarceration of Black and Brown people does not mean that there are, you know, no white people who've been victims of poverty or substance use or mental health or anything like that. And I feel like we've come to the point where it's such a division that if you are a victim, then if this person's a victim, you can't also be a victim of something. You know, why can't we work together for the benefit of each other? Giving Black and Brown people more rights, more agency does not mean that white folks are getting anything taken away from them, right? And I guess I just encourage people to think more deeply about why we feel that division, why we feel that us versus them dynamic. You know, giving people more dignity, acknowledging their humanity, acknowledging the trauma they've experienced, acknowledging the intergenerational trauma of Black and Brown folks in this country doesn't take away from anybody else.
Amen.
And that's not, you know, the purpose of this fight for justice is not to like oppress a different group of people, right?
Right.
It's just that, you know, and I've seen like, you know, memes on, you know, Facebook and stuff like, you know, being a poor white person who maybe feels oppressed by certain pieces of the system. It doesn't, I guess, talking about racism doesn't mean you can't be oppressed as like a white person, right? It means you haven't been oppressed because of your skin color. So it can be a separate issue, and no one's saying you can't be a victim if you're not a Black or brown person, but right. There's that extra layer of victimization in the context of the history of our country, you know, starting from the fact that this country was built, you know, on the backs of enslaved people. You know, so just acknowledging that history and that reality, it's less scary than it needs to be. And as someone, again, who came from a very privileged, affluent, sort of white background, I sort of learned like, this isn't the purpose of this advocacy is not to make people feel bad or make people feel guilty or like they've done something wrong. But the purpose of it is to say, we can all help each other. We can all help address these inequities without anyone being threatened.
100%. I genuinely that is the only piece right there that does give me hope, because it's such a simple, obviously yet very difficult thing to say, like, I think we're all just hurting. And so we react, right? And we react by thinking, by you doing that or that advocacy, you're essentially insinuating that I over here, something like that. And you hit the nail on the head. I interviewed Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, and that he said the exact same thing. It's like, we need to work together to benefit each other. And sometimes that means this area is focused on this or this person, but they, elite, corporate, all that, they have us fighting a culture war,
right?
Instead of like realizing that actually we have a lot more we can.
We're fighting the wrong things.
Right.
And just like one more thing that just kind of popped into my head, the idea of, discussing racism and racist structures. No one wants to be racist, right? No one wants to say I'm racist, but we all make assumptions based on race. Like, we all have those racial biases. So getting to the point where it's not just like you have to continue to deny that you make decisions or judgments based on race, but like, I can sit here and say, like, with all the work I've done, the community I live in, like, I still, like, I have racial biases, right? And it doesn't mean I'm a terrible person. It means I'm acknowledging that. And once I acknowledge that, I can put the work in to change that as much as I can. Right. And so for people to feel like threatened, like you're insulting me, you're making me feel like I'm a racist, and I'm not, like, that's not the point. The point is that, like, we all have that. We're all flawed human beings. None of us are perfect. And so the first step is sort of acknowledging, I have these biases. I don't know everything, and I can work to improve. And that's all anyone can ask of anyone else. Right. So
100%. And I think that's part of what frustrates me sometimes when I see people who have really valid goals and desires, working on really good initiatives, but they tend to lean towards the radicalism. And instead of engaging with the person that is arguing with them on social media about, like, why the point isn't that I want you to feel bad. The point is, I want you to see something so that you can be a part of this. But they don't do a very good job bringing people in that way. And then social media, we just bicker and fight.
Right.
And so I think that's beautiful. I think, like, it's not about making you feel a certain way. If that is their goal, then they're probably not going to see a lot of change.
Right.
But the goal is helping you see something, which generally isn't going to happen with an attack. It's not going to happen with a retort on Instagram. So thank you for that. Jamie, thank you so much, folks.
Thank you.
Why can't we work together better so that we can all be better? Check out the show notes. I'll have lots of links. We'll have some statistics. Jamie, thank you for doing hard work. Keep up the good work. And until then, get mad. Stay blessed.
Thanks for having me.
Get mad. Get mad pre-coffee.